Hello everyone, today we're going to be tuning the Tubular Quad version 7, my custom drone frame that uses tubes for arms. So I'm going to walk you through all the different Betaflight settings you want to be paying attention to, including a new one for Betaflight 4.5, the latest release, and I'll go over my tuning philosophy, and then we'll head out to the field and I'll give you a demo of the PID tuning process. If you want to learn more about the Tubular Quad, check out my past few videos. I cover the whole design, why I use tubes for arms, the build process, and even the maiden flight and some of the issues that I've come across along the way. Friendly reminder, you can buy the Tubular Quad. There's actually two kits. First of which is the Tubular Quad. It's super light, it has a really responsive geometry, and of course it has tubes for arms, which do require a couple extra assembly steps on your end. So if you want a simpler build you can just bolt together. There's also the non-tubular quad, which uses your traditional flat carbon arms, but still maintains that really responsive geometry. Both kits support both digital and analog, so I really think there's something out there for everyone. So please check out those kits. These are the first products I'm selling, and they are a great way to support the channel. All right, without further ado, let's hop into Betaflight. All right, so we're here in Betaflight. The first thing we're going to do is go to the Motors tab and make sure our ESC motor protocol is DShot 600, assuming your hardware supports it. And then most importantly, we want to make sure bidirectional DShot is enabled. So when you enable bidirectional DShot, that also enables the RPM filtering, which in my opinion is maybe the best Betaflight feature that's ever been introduced. 6-inch used to be notorious for having tuning problems, and the Tubular Quad has never had tuning problems because it is so stiff. But I've certainly had tuning problems on other frames, and as soon as they released RPM filtering, I have not had any tuning issues since. So RPM filtering's that good. Make sure you enable bidirectional DShot. Now, speaking of RPM filtering, in the latest release 4.5, they've added this feature called dimmable RPM harmonics. So my basic understanding of it is basically when your motors are spinning, that creates a frequency, but there's also different frequencies caused by the motor spinning, and apparently that's somewhat dependent on how many blades your propeller has. So for tri-blades, they recommend setting this parameter to 100/080, and for twin blades, which I have, they recommend setting the parameter to 180/0. So I'm gonna go to the command line, hit get RPM filter weights, and you can see the default value is 100, 100, 100, and I have already set it to 180/0 because I'm running twin blades. And the reason we want to do this is basically by lowering those weights, we are eliminating delay from the filters, which will make the quad more responsive. So more responsive is more better. While we're in the CLI, I also want to discuss another parameter called min throttle. So I'm going to type get min throttle. So any throttle value below min throttle, Betaflight will just ignore, and the motors won't change RPM or obey any throttle signal. So if you're a normal person and you went into the receiver tab and you set your throttle endpoints to 1000 and 2000, that means that bottom 70, that bottom like 7% of your throttle stick actually ends up as a dead zone. So you want to lower min throttle as far as you can without surpassing the lowest throttle value you see on the receiver tab. So for example, if you see 1002 as the lowest throttle stick value, you would want to set min throttle to something like 1005 or 1010, and that's going to get rid of that big dead band at the bottom of your throttle stick and give you better throttle resolution. So I don't know how many people know about this parameter, but it is a super important one to change. It's like free throttle resolution. Now, since we're also talking about receiver stuff, I briefly want to mention something in the receiver tab, which is RC smoothing. So if you're using any features that basically read how fast you're moving the sticks, so the dynamic D term, feed forward, I term relax, if you're using any of those, you probably want to leave RC smoothing enabled. However, if you have all of those disabled, you can turn off RC smoothing and it will reduce your control delay, but it will kind of make your PIDs and stuff more choppy, especially if you look at it in black box, but in reality it'll probably still fly fine. So that is an option, up to you if you want to turn that on or off. All right, on to the meat and potatoes, the PID tuning tab. I have a fresh profile here so I can show you all of the things that I change in this tab before I even start flying and tuning. So my philosophy with this is, on the right here, there are a lot of extra features on top of the PID loop, but the P, I, and D terms do the heavy lifting of controlling your quad. In fact, if there's something like a gust of wind that hits your quad, the P, I, and D terms are the only things keeping your quad stable. So in my opinion, they're by far the most important things to get tuned correctly. The other things, like dynamically change them, and in my opinion, a lot of times they're band-aids for a untuned quad, a poorly tuned quad, or bad components on your quad. So my philosophy is to turn off all of the extra fluff on the right, tune the P, I, and D values as best as you possibly can, and then if you still feel like there's some kind of deficiency or lack of performance in the way your quad is behaving, then you can go onto the right and only turn on the things you think you need. That way you don't have all of these extra features kind of mucking up the PID loop, and it's also a lot easier to tune the PID loop when you don't have these extra features enabled, because they're constantly changing the PID values and other things, and it makes it hard to feel what's actually going on with the P, I, and D values themselves. I'm going to start off by changing the mode over here by the sliders to off. That's going to allow us to type in values manually and turn off the first feature, which is feed forward. So feed forward kind of blindly adds extra motor value into your quad when you move the sticks rapidly. And this can help the quad track your stick movements a little more closely. But again, to dial in the P, I, and D values, feed forward's really going to mess with how we are feeling the actual PID loop. So we're going to disable it for now, and we can come back later and enable it if we feel like we want extra response on top of the P, I, and D values. So we're going to disable these by just typing in 0. Next up is iTerm Relax. Now, iTerm Relax dynamically lowers the iTerm when you're doing a fast stick motion to try to prevent bounce back, which is associated with high I values. So again, it's dynamically changing one of these values. We're going to turn it off for now, but if you tune your quad and you can't get rid of bounce back and you have some pretty high I gains, you can come back and turn this on after you're done tuning your P, I, and Ds. Next up is anti-gravity. Now, I have never needed to use anti-gravity. Basically prevents corners of your quad from dipping, which is usually associated with poor quality ESCs that can't spin up the motors all at the same speed. So I'm going to turn that off. If your quad is dipping in a certain way every time you get on the throttle, just turn that back on. Up next is throttle boost. I understand this as basically feed forward, but for your throttle stick. So if you move the throttle stick quickly, it's going to overdrive the motors to try to get them to speed up faster and match your throttle position. So I just turn this off. If you feel like your throttle stick is too sluggish, you can come back and turn this up later. Now, dynamic idle value. This is actually a feature that we want to enable. So what dynamic idle does is it uses the bidirectional D-Shot telemetry to read the motor RPMs and prevent the RPM from dropping below a certain set point. And we want to prevent the motors from dropping below a certain RPM because at really low RPM, motors can either desync or have really bad torque and really bad response, which really bad response of a motor also leads to really bad response of the quad. And we want good response, so we want to enable the dynamic idle value. So Betaflight recommends a value of 30 to 35, which corresponds to an idle value of 3,000 to 3,500 RPM. Now in my specific case, I'm using a pretty low kV motor, 1922 kV on 4S, which is going to have better torque at lower RPM compared to a higher kV motor. So I'm actually going to run a lower than recommended value of 27, which corresponds to a 2,700 RPM idle. And we'll see how that works out. If I'm having bad response at zero throttle, I will increase that later. Now, the last thing on this page that I almost forgot to mention is dynamic damping. So Dynamic damping, again, changes the D term dynamically to basically boost it during fast motions to get a strong damping effect without running a super high D term all the time, which can sometimes cause hot motors. But honestly, if you have your filter set correctly, you probably don't need the dynamic damping. So we're going to, again, just set these to 0 to disable this for now. And if for some reason you need to just crank the D term to control your fast motions, but you're getting hot motors as well while you're cruising, then maybe you come back and re-enable this. All right, so that's it for the PID profile settings tab. Again, we're pretty much just disabling all of the extra features so we can feel the P, I, and D values, tune them the best we can, and then we'll come back and add in anything we think we need. So let's move on to the filter settings tab. To really tune the filters correctly, you probably want to be looking at your raw gyro data in Blackbox and then changing values accordingly. So we haven't flown the quad yet, but I do know that the tubular quad specifically is a very stiff frame, and I know I can run more aggressive filtering. So to start off with, I'm just going to slide these sliders all the way to the right towards less filtering. And that's still going to be pretty safe for the tubular quad. And I know this just because I have experience with previous tubular quad versions. Again, we can come back after looking at Blackbox or something and tweak these values further, but for now, this is going to be a good starting point. So that's it for the Betaflight settings. Let's go ahead and tune this thing. All right, so we are out here at our local flying spot, and we're hopefully gonna get the tubular quad tuned up. But first, I always like to spin the props, make sure all the props are going the right way, and do a line of sight test hover to make sure everything's okay before we get behind the goggles. So let's do that first. All right, so all the props are going the right way. I'm gonna step back and make sure this thing hovers correctly. So as you can see, it does not. That looked a lot like an incorrect flight controller orientation. Let's hop right over to the computer and see what the heck's going on. So I didn't bother filming it, but indeed, for whatever reason, the flight controller was rotated 90 degrees, I think by default, because I did not touch that setting after doing a full chip erase and reflashing. So I should have done better due diligence with setting up the flight controller, but here we are. This is why you do the test hover line of sight and you stand way back. It was completely unplanned, but that's always a good idea. So we're gonna try this again, and I think it's gonna work this time, but we'll find out. All right, here we go, take 2. Props are spinning the right way. Stand back in case it wants to kill us. There we go. Gonna check all of the control directions. All right, looks good. We're in business. All right, I have no OSD. We're off to a good start. All right, now I think I forgot to configure the OSD, so we're gonna do that and try again. Got my OSD set up, which I forgot to do. Let's go ahead and tune this thing. So I'm just gonna start off on the stripped down default PIDs here and feel them out a little bit, see what needs to be addressed. So mostly I'm just gonna make big like stick movements, really fast flips and rolls, because that's a great way to evaluate the response of the quad. So I can see I have a little bit of bounce back, and the response isn't super immediate or super sharp. So there's not like a ton of bounce back or anything, so I don't feel like the P to D ratio needs to change that much, but I definitely need to just crank up all the gains. So I'm just gonna start off by cranking up P and D, go from there. All right, so we're gonna go to the PID tuning tab, and then for P, I'm just gonna try 60 on roll and like 63 on pitch. On most craft, pitch needs to be higher than roll because the control authority is worse due to the long fuselages. On the tubular quad, the split doesn't need to be quite as big because the fuselage is so short and it's got the toilet tank battery. And then derivative, let's see, we do not want to change Dmax. We want to change the derivative because Dmax is not doing anything. So I'm going to just try like 40 and 42 or something for now. Don't forget to hit save or save in your goggles if you're doing it through the OSD. All right, let's see how that feels. I just increased P and D by more or less the same amount, so it should feel sharper. And it certainly already is sharper. You can also hear the motors are a little bit louder, like they spool up more because they're getting that quad to rotate more. And I'm trying to look at the bounce back at the ends of these flips and rolls. And there's basically none. So that tells me I can probably increase the P more than the D now. Yeah. Looks really good on the bounce back. So maybe we'll just add more P than D next go round. I also want to feel the motors. And you want to feel the motors because usually if you crank up your D gain too much, they're going to get hot. And these motors are super cool, so we can definitely crank the D gain more. So again, to our PID tuning tab, I'm going to try, we'll just go a little crazy here. We'll try 70 and 75. For pitch, for roll and pitch, P, and then for our derivative, we'll go like 45 and 47. We're not going to increase that quite as much as we did with the P because our bounce back was very controlled. So getting the balance between the two is important. And it's giving me an error. Current slider positions may cause flyaways, motor damage, or unsafe craft behavior. So that means we're getting probably pretty aggressive with the D term. Just fine if you keep an eye on your motor temps. You're not going to do anything bad, but definitely be aware of what you're doing. All right, see how this feels. Feels really good now with the higher values. This is why tuning your PIDs is so important because it makes the quad feel so much more locked in. Now let's take a look at our bounce back here. I think like just a tiny hair on the pitch. Let's take a look at the roll. Like barely any. So we have a pretty good split here. And now let me feel the motor temps, and if they're okay, I guess we keep going. Our P value is already pretty high at 70. So these are also slightly beat up props, and it's not the worst idea to tune on slightly beat up props because it's a bit of a worst case scenario for your filters. So if you tuned on super clean props and then bent a prop, there's the risk that you get that noise in the filters and all of a sudden like your motors get smoked because your D term's too aggressive or something like that. I don't know if I've ever really run a P value this high, but we'll just keep going. I'm gonna do 75 and 80, and I don't know, 47 and 50 on the D, and we'll see how that feels. Then I also need to start looking at how the I term feels and also the yaw, which we have not paid any attention to yet. So again, we're just kind of paying attention to the response on the fast motions. Also about the end of this battery here, so I don't know, it feels good. Let's do a couple little floats here. Try to assess our I term. So if it feels like not very locked in on low throttle floats, usually a little more I helps. But you don't want to run too much I, because that leads to I term windup. Also, how it responds to wind is how you determine I, so it's kind of dead calm today. So I might have to revisit the I term and then quickly look at our yaw. Yeah, yaw's not very good, so we'll mess with that. But I do need to change the battery. So I did feel like I could get maybe a little more out of the pitch axis. I don't want to push it too far, but we'll do like 82 and 51 or something, just a tad. And then the yaw was pretty dead, so I'm going to go straight up to 60 on yaw for P. And I couldn't really feel I too well. So on this next battery, I'm going to try to pay more attention to how it responds when like floating, or if we get any wind here, which is there's none. All right, fresh battery. Let's see how it feels. Let's take a look at that yaw. Just definitely better. Can probably try a little bit more P on the yaw. Honestly, everything else feels really good. Let's try to get some floats. Oops. Not the ground. Yeah, I'm not talking much right now because I'm trying to find like what's wrong with this tune, and it's in a pretty good spot. I'm gonna try a little bit of extra tweaking. All right, so the yaw, we can definitely add more. I don't know, 68 on the P there, and then I'll try a tad more I, but you don't need a ton. So 85 on roll, 90 on pitch, but again, you want to try to keep this as low as you can. I just have a feeling when it gets windier, I'm going to want a little more I, but in these conditions today, if it always felt like this, I probably wouldn't touch it. Yeah, I really don't know how much more to push, like P and D on roll and pitch, because I feel like these tiny little motors probably don't have much left in them for response. So we're starting to approach what is a very solid baseline tune here. And we're starting to approach where you might want to actually look at the data from Black Box if you're a diehard. As far as doing it old school and doing it by feel, like we're doing it now, we're kind of approaching a really good spot. Okay, now I'm getting an error. MSP. Of course, because I'm filming and we're getting a new error I've never seen before. So we're gonna unplug the quad. Check all the switch positions, plug it back in. All right, we're back in business. Feels really good. Checking out that yaw again. Can really hear those motors spooling up on the yaw. So they're definitely trying hard, so probably not too much more, just cranking up that P term is going to do on the yaw. Yeah, this is, I think I'm gonna leave it probably here. This is a really great baseline tune, so we'll just fly around a little bit. And there's the low battery warning. All right, that feels really good. All right, so I feel like we've gotten the tubular quad into a really great baseline tune. It feels so much better than just the default PIDs we started out with 2 batteries ago. So much more responsive. The PD balance, I think, is pretty good. I can't really feel a way where I could make it better. And as you saw, we didn't turn on any of the extra features like iTerm Relax or D-Min or any of that, and we got it performing really great. At this point, if you had some kind of deficiency with the way you felt the quad was performing, that's when you would add in one of those features, fly it again and see how it felt, if it made an improvement or not. In my case, I feel like I don't really need to add in any of those extra features. I'll definitely say the tubular quad is such a joy to tune. These stiff tubular arms mean that I've never run into any hot motor problems. So definitely check out the tubular quad kits if you want an easy to tune 6-inch quad. Next steps in terms of tuning this thing, I definitely want to fly it again in windier conditions to dial in that iTerm, because iTerm generally helps get rid of little bobbles, which often show themselves in more turbulent air like windy conditions. And if you really wanted every last % of performance out of your tune, you would definitely want to look at the Black Box logs and look at the response of the quad in super slow motion and look at the filtering and dial in all of that stuff. So that's why I'm calling this a baseline tune, not a final tune. But regardless, I hope you guys found this video helpful or at least enjoyed it. If you did, please give the video a like. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you think I missed or any PID tuning secrets you'd like to share with the rest of the community. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future videos where we will definitely be flying this more. Thanks for watching.